How people are connected and how some of the surnames that are still around Crookstown today are here, and also some people mightn't have a clue of their very own history, and there's one person in particular that might be pleasantly surprised when they find out about their family that's here, and I don't think she knows, and she was one of our speakers earlier. So if she's here, she'll find out a little bit more. So basically, I'm going to talk about the history of the church, a few interesting connections to the locality. You mentioned about Japan earlier. Japan seems to be a bit of a team going on here. We had a Canon Gray who was rector here in 1924, and he was the chap who introduced hockey to Japan. So there's another Japanese connection there, folks, okay? So basically, it's a mixed graveyard. It goes back to pre-Reformation, and if we look at the school's folklore collection there, we have Tom Callahan's daughter here among us. So a young Tom wrote in the school's folklore collection in 1938 regarding Moviddy that many years ago there was a Catholic church and monastery in Crookstown where the present church now stands. In Moviddy graveyard, they are the remains of a watch house. It is here that Protestants at the time forced Catholics to keep watch when a Protestant came to be buried for fear that the body might be stolen. Grave robbing was a thing back then for medical science, okay? So basically, with the watch house, right, I wasn't too sure about it until we were looking at Ordnance Survey maps there from 1842, and on the northern side of the church there was a note, there was some sort of structure there, so Tom was on the ball with that one. Okay? So the name Moviddy itself means the plain of the reeds, so obviously it was quite marshy land back in the day. And the earliest headstone we have here is for a Phil Lambert, and Phil was buried in 1717 and he died at the age of 62. And the epitaph on that headstone says, "My glass is out, I must away." There's a lovely roofless mausoleum over the other side of the church called the Bailey Mausoleum, which is linked to the rise of Rycourt, and I'll be talking about that there a little bit later. But we touched there on the Herricks. Michael was talking there about Belmont Mill, and the original deed for the mill I have seen, and it is from 1810, and our Herricks are buried right straight up there. Okay, so you see the tabletop tomb that's surrounded there by the iron railings. That is the Herrick family. They're a very interesting family. So basically, this tomb here that's beside us is erected to the memory of Mr. Francis Herrick, second son of the late Edward Herrick of Belmont, Crookstown, and it was erected by Louisa Herrick, his sorrowing widow, and he died on the 16th of April 1850. And the Herrick family lived up in Belmont House, and that's where Michael Lucy's family now lives at the moment. They had 669 acres in County Cork and 703 in Tipperary and in Laois, so they were massive landowners at the time. And in April 38, as part of the school's folklore project, a local child, Dennis Bradfield, tells us what the Herricks were really like from a local perspective. They weren't the greatest of landlords, unfortunately. Okay? So George Herrick, as written by Dennis, was the landlord to the tenants in Upper Belmont. He was a bad landlord, for he evicted a poor woman and her son off the land because they couldn't pay their rent. A hut was put up for them by the Land League party, and it was called the Land League House. And that house, well, what's left of it, is up by Humphreys, up the road. There was a small little stone hut up there inside the ditch on the left. That was your Land League House there, because all of that land came under Herricks as well. So anyway, right, there was this painting painted by an artist called Robert Lowe Stopford. And this painting was of Belmont Gate Lodge in 1855, which was also a mill house, and it's up there, the Bandon Road. Everyone stops to take a picture of Michael Lucy's Gate Lodge. But Michael Lucy luckily got this painting because it was bought at Adams Auctions. And the brilliant thing about the painting was there was a big write-up on the back of it. And on the writing, on the back of the painting, was, quote, "Belmont had belonged to the same family," in inverted commas, the Herricks. "Their house was in the old cattle sheds, and when they heard that Cromwell's soldiers were coming, they dug a huge hole, they buried their wonderful silver, and they knew that the butler that helped them might tell them about it. So they shot him. They buried him with the silver. And then it says at the back of the picture, they gave very valuable old communion silver to Moviddy, and the rector of Moviddy did a write-up of that in the Church of Ireland Gazette in the 1970s. So it was a big heavy chalice, belonged to the church here, but it wasn't really fit for communion use because it was quite heavy in nature. So when in Herck ownership, up to the 40s, the lodge also housed the Musgrave pack of hounds, and the original kennels adjoined the yard. So, I'll be coming back to Mr. Herck now in a second, but I'm just going to talk briefly about the Warrens. So, the Warrens are buried there in the gravestone with the pointed top there straight in front of it. So that's the Warrens, obviously the Warrens of Warrenscourt. And it says, "'Tis the family burial place of the Reverend Warren of Crookstown House, born on the 7th of March 1794, and he died on the 7th of May 1879, honoured and loved by all, and also Mary Crawford, his wife, who died in Monkstown in April 1888. And they had a son called Robert who died in 1947 when he was 77. This Robert Warren, anyway, he was the last rector of Canaway. So Canavy is always written as Canaway in all the old writings, and he lived to the grand age of 85. He was ordained in 1819, and he was appointed to the parish of Canaway in 1840. The Irish Ecclesiastical Gazette, which is now the Church of Ireland Gazette, stated, "Although the parish contained few members of the church, they continued regularly to conduct services and preach until very recently, until mental and bodily infirmity made him desist." So, inside the ruined church building, which you cannot go for health and safety reasons, there is one remaining church plaque on the wall, and that church plaque is actually dedicated to the Warrens. So it says that the Right Honourable Robert R. Warren, in loving memory, erected by his wife Mary R. Warren, daughter of Charles Perry Cork, 1897. That's what's on the plaque. And his son Robert, the chap that died in 1947, is listed in 1901 as a member of the Poor Law Commissioners. He's listed as a magistrate, a civil engineer, and a justice of the peace and a landowner. So he had a very big profile going on. Now, have any of you ever heard of a weasel hunt? Do you know what a stoat is? Yeah. You haven't heard of a stoat? Yeah. Well, stoat hunting was a huge thing here, and it was very rare. And we used to have British servicemen actually take leave from the British Army and come over here for the purposes of hunting. And who was behind all that? Our friends the Herricks. Okay, so we're going to hear a little bit more now about John Herck and his famous weasel hounds, because that's what they were known as in Great Britain, were the weasel hounds. So John and his weasel hounds. So John died in November the 24th, 1924, and he was instrumental in establishing the practice of weasel hunting in Ireland. Of course, we only have stoats, but nonetheless, this is what the sport was called back in the day. So he was secretary of the Musgrave Hunt since 1889. He was the eldest son of Captain Herck, and he was born in 1862 over in Belmont House. He joined the South Cork Militia in 1881, and he was the captain of same, and he resigned in 1895. He lived up the road in Belmont House and married a lady called Emily Holmes from Carrigmore, County Cork. And there was very popular social magazines of the time, you know, the way we have social magazines here in Ireland, like, you know, your Hello magazine, your OK magazine. In Britain, you had a thing called Country Life magazine, who's the who's who of the landed gentry, and they got a write-up in it in 1911. So in May 1911, the unusual contribution of the Herck family to Irish hunting was noted. Quote, "Packs of weasel hounds are so rare in their existence, little is known of them, and mention of them causes great surprise. The one of which I now write is called the Belmont Beagles, and they were formed in 1897 when fox hunting was stopped in the Musgrave country of County Cork. The first were established originally from an existing pack belonging to Captain Sarsfield in Cork, and they are a private family pack, the master of whom was Captain Herck, taking no subscription, and the kennels being close to his house in Crookstown. It consists of 12 and a half couple of mixed hounds, small black and tan beagles, 11 or 12 inches high, and the journalist says they are indeed a diminutive of engaging appearance, and to make pets of them must be purely irresistible. So I'd love to have seen one of these little beagle hounds and bring one of them home myself. So, as I said, the army guys got special leave, and there is a record in the Highland Light Infantry Chronicle in 1910, and the record reads as follows. Great consternation in an orderly room was caused, and a record created in the leave book by 2 officers applying for leave for the purposes of weasel hunting in the Muskerry country, and owned by the Secretary of the Fox Hunt, is a pack of small beagles who during the summer and autumn months hunt stoats. And these hunts were upwards of 25 people, and these hunts lasted for 3 hours, so that was some walking. Okay? Now, over here in the middle, just to the side of me here, is a small gravestone, and this is the Fitzsimons family in Castlemore, and it's in loving memory to Robert Fitzsimons, who died on the 7th of September 1935, and his wife Maud, who died in 1957, and they were pivotal because Robert was the manager of Castlemore Quarry, so we'll remember him. So I'll just get Michael to move up a tiny bit, and we'll learn about the Babingtons and the Crookstown letter. And basically, our village nearly came to blows between Catholics and Protestants, all because of one dodgy newspaper article. And we're going to find out about that now in a second.
Yeah, very good. Okay, you can follow on.
On the 29th of August 1978, aged 70, and the Reverend Hume Babington, who died on the 23rd of January 1886. How many of you have heard of Shear Street in Cork? Yeah, there you go. Okay, so we have a connection there to Shear Street in Cork. And of course, we've pains over the terrace, so we'll be coming across a few pains on our travels as well. Okay, so this is the grave of Sarah Payne Shears, and it's the same Shears that the street in Cork is named after. And it says it's erected by her children in loving memory of Sarah, widow of J.W. Payne Shears. We'll hear a little bit about him later when we talk about the church. And of course, who was she? She was the eldest daughter of the Reverend Robert Warren of Crookstown. Everyone is connected, okay? She died on the 14th of November 1907, aged 82, and her headstone reads, "Until daybreak, the shadows flee away." I think that's a gorgeous little epitaph there. Okay? So, her husband was a guy called John Warren Payne Shears. That's a bit of a mouthful for anybody, okay? And he was appointed to the vacancy of the Board of Directors of the Great Southern and Western Railway, because we heard the railway there passed through Crookstown. And we read on the 9th of July 1890 in the Cork Constitution paper that he was involved in plans with a very famous architect called J. Hill to refurbish the courthouse in Cork. And J. Hill was also the architect who designed the church that is standing behind us. So the architect that designed Cork County Courthouse designed the church that is standing there behind us as well. So it's all connected. So, behind us here then, we heard about Henry Wall there from Michael. So we have the Wall family burial site there, just right at the back. And we heard about the exploits of Henry, who was a beloved local vet to all of us, but he was also a marvellous rugby player. He went to Castleknock College in Dublin. He played rugby for UCD, and he also played for Dolphin in Cork as well. He scored a try against the All Blacks from New Zealand in '64, and he was selected in 1965 to play for Ireland in the Five Nations. Okay? But that's not where we're leaving the Walls. We're going to take a little step back further into the Wall family history, and we're going to talk about a little plaque that is in the Cork County Museum as well, and we're going to hear a little bit about something called the Rat Club, which was a private gentleman's club. So I'm bringing you all the way now back to 1798. Rebellion was in the air and lawlessness was absolutely rife in Crookstown. So I just want to have a tiny little bit of information on the walls there and the connections again that we have. So one sec there now. So, as you know, with 1798 there was an awful lot of unrest, and there was intelligence coming in from England that the French fleet were about to come in, and there was supposed to be 30 enormous rats crossing the English Channel, so you could feel panic was in the air at the moment, and lawlessness was absolutely rampant in Musgrave. So the gentlemen of West Musgrave and Barrett's Barony decided we'll meet together and we'll prevent this lawlessness, and we'll have a bit of law and order going on here. So basically, on the 2nd of February 1798, at the house of Mr. Walter Wall in Moviddy, there was a meeting for considering the propriety of associating to promote public justice and due execution of the law, and Sir Robert Warren was the chair of that, and they passed a resolution that having considered the baronies of West and East Musgrave, Barrett's and its vicinity, is infested for some years with a desperate gang of robbers, rendered not more formidable by their extensive conspiracy and their atrocious acts of violence than by their prejudice and subordination. We whose names that are hereunto subscribed, anxious for the protection of the persons and properties of the inhabitants of our district, on whose loyalty and peaceable demeanour we are happy to hear testimony, deem it expedient that a society be formed for the purpose of aiding the civil magistrates in detecting, apprehending and prosecuting heinous offenders within our district, and we form ourselves into a society for that purpose. And it was signed Robert Warren, Chairman, Samuel Pinrose Jr., Herbert Gilman, James Blaine, and all of these men were commemorated on a plaque dedicated to members of the Rat Club, and it's in Cork County Museum, and unfortunately we don't have a whole lot of other information about this gentleman's society. Now, I don't know if I can move into the middle. I'm going to stay put because it's a bit uneven before we go down to the back, because I only have a few more to go. So the headstones in the middle are going to be of very much interest to somebody here, and she'll find out who she is now in a minute. She'll probably judge by it halfway through it. So in the middle, okay, there's the big fancy headstone straight ahead there, the tall one, okay? And this is the Welpy family headstone. And the Welpys have descendants living here in Crookstown, and they were incredibly interesting people, okay? So it says, here lies the body of William Welpy, who departed this life on the 28th of April 1835, aged 91 years. Also Anne, his wife, who departed this life on May the 11th, 1836. Also, aged 81 years, Duke Welpy, aged 65, who departed on the 23rd of February 1864. In sure and certain hope of eternal life, who finished the work of Christ, he is not dead but sleepeth. So we're going to go back to, I suppose, when we had Gaelic chieftains in Ireland, and there was a lot of movement to land hither and thither, and we heard a little bit about that earlier with the McCartys. So there was a treaty in Glanmire, and it happened in 1118, and it divided the kingdom of Munster into Desmond and Thomond. The McCartys were an old Irish clan, and they held a stronghold which was consolidated with the arrival of Henry II, with whom Tyke McCarthy, upon his submission, was noted the King of Desmond. So it consisted of parts really of Cork and Kerry. So for 5 centuries the McCartys dominated much of Munster with 4 major branches. Cormac McCarthy, the King of Desmond, founded Kilmurry Abbey in 1465, and it's the burial place of the McCartys who lived in Blarney Castle. The next stronghold then obviously was Castlemore and Clodagh, and each of the families continued resistance to Norman and English encroachments up to the 17th century. So like all the Gaelic aristocracy, they lost almost everything, and an exception was Macroom Castle, which passed on to the White family of Bantry House, descendants of Cormac Lauder Macharrick. So at the time, O'Sullivan Moore was presiding at the meetings of the Munster chiefs, and he decided to make McCarthy the McCarthy Moor. So you often would have heard of the McCarthy Moor. Okay. No. So they kept resisting, and they got a little bit stuck. And they said, we need to consolidate our position here in Munster. What are we going to do? Enter, stage left, the Welpy family. Okay. So the Welpys basically were a Welsh family who landed in Bandon, and in 1659 the census shows a Joseph Welpy. Okay. So there was Welpys in Bandon back in 1597, and we've evidence of that. And there was a lady called Della Welpy, and she married Cormac William McCarthy in 1710. Della was the daughter of this Joseph McCarthy, or Joseph Welpy, and as she was an heiress, and that during the penal times Catholics couldn't own property, so Cormac McCarthy married her and changed his name to Cormac Welpy, adopting his father-in-law's surname and changing his religion to Protestant in order to get his hands on his wife's inheritance, which was originally the land the McCarthys held anyway. Right, so he did things a different way, but he got the land back, so there you go. So John McCarthy was also known as Welpy. He was the son of Cormac, and he married a Flemish lady called Elizabeth Minor, and he had 3 sons and 8 daughters for her. And the sons were Willem, Joseph and John and Bingour married a Miss Norwood, and a daughter, one of them married a Mr. Crowe, and another a Walter Phillips up in Musgrove. And we're now going to talk about Willem, the son of John, because he's buried over there. So Willem now became the McCarthy Moor, and he married Anne Harris of Bandon, and on the death of his parents he moved to a farm called Croholla, and later down to Lower Belmont, where he died in 1833, aged 91. And it is stated that he was divested of nearly all his property, so he lost everything. Even though he married, inherited loads of stuff, unfortunately he lost it all. And his wife died in 1836, and both of them are buried under the Welpy headstone over there. They had 3 sons and 6 daughters. One of them was Marmaduke, known as the Duke. And Marmaduke is also buried there, and he died in 1864, and he married Jane Uncles of Carberry and lived in Cork City. And one of the saddest little headstones, and I had to do a bit of research because I wanted this little chap to be remembered, is straight in front behind Michael. It's the middle one of the 3. So there's one by the wall, there's the middle one, and then there's the tiny one, so it's the middle one there. And this headstone is very emotional because of the epitaph that's written on it. And I actually cried when I was writing this, because the love the parents had for this little boy really came across. And this is the Rose family. So they're linked to the Welpys because Mary Welpy McCarthy Moore was one of the daughters of the William Welpy we were talking about that lost everything. And she married a chap called William Rose, who came from Kent. And he also had a lovely daughter called Mary Ann, born in 1811 in Ballincollig. And this is their little son's grave. And there's so many buried here today, and families lost to the mist of time, that we might never hear their stories, but everyone here deserves to be remembered. And this is what his headstone says. Here lieth the body of William Rose, who departed this life in February the 9th, 1822, aged 8 years and 4 months. May his soul rest in peace, amen. My days on earth have been few, by God's supreme decree. O reader, stop and think, for you must shortly follow me. This lovely rose, so young and fair, called home by early doom, just came to show how sweet a flower may bloom. And I think the lady who's in the audience now knows her own family. Deirdre, they're yours. So, anytime you come down here now, you know the story of the Welpys and the McCarthys. So we're going to trot down now just to 2 final graves before I give a summary of the church there. I'm going to talk about another grave that's down and over that you can kind of see in your own time. It's a little bit inaccessible. So the first thing is the Bailey Mausoleum, which is here. Okay, So this is an early 18th century mausoleum, and when I was a child in the 80s it had a roof on it, and then the roof came off it with old age and whatever, and inside it there is a fantastic plaque, and I'll read the inscription on it. So when the Baileys built this, they were living in Castlemore Castle, okay, and this goes back really to about 1719, okay, so it's the oldest mausoleum that's in the churchyard, and these are the ancestors of Rosaleen Tonson-Roy over in Rye Court, so they intermarried with the Roys, and that's why the Roys are here. So it says on the wall, which is very hard to read, this monument erected at the cost of Mrs. Anne Bailey, the widow of John Bailey of Castlemore Esquire, to preserve his memory, who died on the 15th of June, Anno Christi 1719. He was a gent who had the truest of his country at heart. At the Revolution, he served in person in the wars of Ireland till the kingdom was reduced to peace and quietness. Quitting the war, he returned to his wife and children and shewed himself as a good a husband and indulgent a father, as he was a true subject, being honoured with a commission of the peace. He always administered justice so uprightly that he never blemished his commission, and died lamented by all good men that knew him. And that is literally what's on the plaque inside the wall there. Okay? So if you have time at some stage, you should go in and read it. Now we're going to find out a little bit about the Krooks of Krookstown, and they were a little bit eccentric, okay, but which of us isn't? So we have Thomas and Richard Krook, so there's like two tabletop tombs there, Michael's near one and then there's one behind them. So the first one is to Thomas and Richard Krook, erected by Thomas E. Krook of Ahaven and Richard B. Krook of Carrickadrohid on the 4th of August 1830. And in the tabletop tomb that is straight in front of the mausoleum is the burial place of William Krook Esquire, of Ahaven and his family. He departed the life on the 22nd of August AD 1817. So this William Krook was listed as being buried here in the Habolog parish records on the 28th of June 1817, but his headstone really reads the 22nd of August. So his father died in 1768 and he was called Thomas, and he was married to Elizabeth Warren. See, we're all connected. So the Warrens and the Krooks go way back, and they're all historically interconnected. And his ancestor Thomas Krook married Ellen, daughter of Tig Diarmid McCarthy, so interconnected with the McCarthys as well, and he was Lord of Musgrave. And he built a large fortified house with a fish tank on the roof in Krookstown. So we have a fish yard, we have a fish tank. Yeah, I sense a team going on here. Okay. So, and Mr. Smith records Mr. Krook living in Krookstown in 1751, and Mr. Smith says, a mile west of Rye Court is Inchirahel, alias Krookstown. So Krookstown really only existed as Krookstown in the mid-1700s, and before that it was Inchirahel. We've all heard of Inchirahely. So Inchirahel is really where we are, okay? Not Krookstown. So how they got it then, so it says that Krookstown was an old improvement with good gardens and large orchards of cider fruit. I don't know did they make cider or not, but probably did if they mentioned cider fruit as far back as 1751. To the westward of the house are fine groves of fir, and it is now the estate of Mr. Krook. The mother of Robert Warren, first baronet, was Anne Krook, and this house might have got its name for her Krookstown house. So that's how the Krooks came to Krookstown, and they came in actually through Crookhaven. You know, you heard about the siege of Baltimore and all of that. So the Krooks actually came in that way, made their way up here, intermarried, and that's why Krookstown is Krookstown and is no longer called Inchirahel. So the last thing then I will reference is the Samuel Devonshire Pinrose Crypt, which you can't access. It is the other mausoleum that's behind Michael there with all the overgrowth on it. So this tomb was erected in 1821, and the Pinroses were a Quaker family, and they came over from Waterford in the 1600s. And in 1775, Samuel Pinrose married Mary, daughter of George Randall of Barnhill in County Cork. and his son Samuel Pinrose of Shandangan was born in 1776, and they had a vast estate in Aglish, Canavy, and they lived in Rosemont House in Aglish in 1814, and also they owned Farron House in 1837, which was worth £24, and later on the lands were sold in 1864. So, did you know Crookstown? Do you know Tom Crean, the Arctic explorer? Did you know that an Antarctic explorer was born here in Crookstown? We have a connection. There was a chap called Robert Ford. So Robert Ford was born here, here in Moviddy, and he was born here in 1875. And his mother was a lady called Charity Payne. So again, Payne's again coming in, okay. So he joined up with the Royal Navy, and he became a petty officer. So he started his naval career when he was only 16 years of age, and he joined Robert Falcon Scott's Terra Nova expedition, which is the one that Tom Crean was actually on. Okay, and that went down to survey the Antarctic plateaus in 1910 to 1913. And he rose to the rank of Petty Officer First Class with the Royal Navy. So they headed out from Cape Evans anyway in January 1911 to do the polar ice caps, and the temperatures dropped to minus 62 degrees Celsius. And unfortunately he got severe frostbite and he had to be sent back to land. So he was sent off the ship in March 1912. And Robert Falcon Scott's actual logbook said that he was irreplaceable. Quote, "No one who could replace him." He's commemorated by the naming of Mount Ford, a monumental peak of over 1,200 metres at the head of the Hunt Glacier in Antarctica. He died in 1959, and there's a big plaque commemorating him in the middle of Cove, and there's a plaque on his house which is beside the Social Welfare Office in Cove as well. So he finished out his days in a quiet life over in Cove, but he was born here in our village. So we've got an Olympian and we've got an Antarctic explorer. I think we're doing very well, lads, as a village. So to conclude, I'm just going to do a bit on the church actually behind us. So this is the last bit I have to do. So we're going to kind of see how the church started out, how it ended up as it is, and I'll be as quick as I can with that because it's starting to rain there. Okay? So basically this church here, okay, the first mention of a Protestant presence I can find here in Moviddy goes back to 1591, and the rector back then was a guy called Nicholas O'Flynn, and he was succeeded by a William Healy in 1615, and William was rector to 1632, where he was deprived of his post or he resigned. So very suspicious circumstances there. I can't find a reference to a physical church before 1697, but William Messier Brady, a church historian, mentions that Moviddy Church underwent repair in 1697 when John Westentall was the archdeacon, and the sacrament was to receive there 3 times a year with service on Sunday, and there were only 7 or 8 Protestant families living in the village, and in 1694 it was recorded that some Papists married to Protestants and bred their children Papists. So there was a lot of intermarriage, and we were a very open parish. But we were very forward thinking, and then the penal laws came in a year later, and the law regarding intermarriage with Protestants was only repealed in 1778. There is a record of the church in 1699 as follows: Moviddy Church in repair, sermon every Sunday, sacrament 3 times a year. And the church we see behind us was built in 1820, and papers describe the church as give an overview of the church, but they also show that there was an old thatched residence beside it that was unfit to be lived in, and it was 80 acres, and the rector got a salary of £75. Okay, so as progressive as our village was, it was also regressive, because one of the rectors that was in charge here had a very miserable life because of the way he was treated. So there was a magazine called Fraser's Magazine, The Town and Country, and in December 1833 they listed a Tom St. Lawrence in 1818 as being the rector of Moviddy. And there was only 31 Protestants in the whole of Moviddy. So if you look at Moviddy Union that's there now, we've got Kilmurry, Kilbenane and Templemartin. Back then there was only 31 of them. Okay? And he was a really, really informal guy. He was a lovely chap, and he owned 10,094 acres of land. But you didn't dare call him Rector St. Lawrence or Reverend St. Lawrence. He's like, nah, I'm just Mr. Tom. So everyone called him Mr. Tom. He was a lovely, jovial character. But the problem was, his dad was the Bishop of Cork, and that caused problems in the poor man's life. So two of his brothers were ordained, okay? But that led to suspicion that he didn't get his job out of merit, he got it out of nepotism. So your dad was the bishop, you got the job here in Moviddy, you got a nice parish tidied up for you, and it caused him no lint of depression. So he ended up anyway marrying the daughter of Lady Colthurst in Blarney, a lady called Miss Grant, okay? And it was alleged that Moviddy Union of Parishes was created for him in 1818, and there was a book called The Black Book, an exposition of abuses in church and state, and it was written by John Wade in 1835, and it says that there were 10 promotions in the St. Lawrence family. So 10 clerical promotions in the St. Lawrence family. So no wonder rumours got out there. So basically, okay, the Bishop of Ferns had to defend the situation, and he said, "Your Lordship's words would signify that the Bishop of Cork made that union that year for his son, but the fact is he never made it at all, because returns to Parliament in 1806 mention that the union of Moviddy, Aglish and Kilbenane existed from time immemorial." So this poor man literally died in an awful way, bereft. But there's a positive side to Mr. Tom's story, okay? He wrote amazing ecclesiastical poetry. So he wrote about the Lord as my shepherd, and he changed it, and he said, "The Lord is my shepherd, his hand gently leads me to fountains of freshness and streams ever pure. The Lord is my shepherd, his love kindly feeds me, and pastures of verdure from danger secure. From the snares of the tempter his grace shall defend me, and guide my faint steps to his old blessed fold." So we're moving on to 1834 after Mr. Tom. The population moved up to 35, and the Catholic population was 2,758. And the church then was renovated, and it was renovated in the early English style. And the ecclesiastical commissioners gave £224 towards repairs in 1837. So the thing was built 17 years and had to be repaired. So it wasn't the greatest of structures, to be quite honest. Okay? And in 1860, the church and the glebe were described as being in good order, and there were 9 receiving communion. So basically then, the other renovations happened then in the 1890s, and the church was completely remodelled. And in 1903, Moviddy Church was recently improved by substituting the wood windows with stone mullioned windows and an ornamental ceiling of pitch pine. And the designs of the renovations were carried out by W.H. Hill Esquire, who did the courthouse in Washington Street. And there was a lovely carved oak pulpit and prayer desk dedicated by Mrs. Warren in memory of her husband, the late Judge Warren, who was a generous benefactor to the Church of Ireland. And in 1903, the Moviddy Church dedicated a new holy table presented by Captain Roy of Rycourt in memory of his wife. And at the same time, a lectern was presented by Summers Payne as a memorial to his father, John Warren Payne Shears. So on the 10th of November 1933, the church got a new American organ, okay, and then Reverend Whitney Morte Taylor became rector of Moviddy from 33 to 64, was there for 31 years, but in 1961 the church was closed and the internal contents were sold off in the Church of Ireland Gazette. The roof was removed by Hornibrooks Builders in 1968, and in the Church of Ireland Gazette for the 19th of January 1974, Moviddy Church is described as an abandoned ruin. So the building went to ruin really within a very short period of time. So to conclude then, obviously some of the headstones are inaccessible, but I'm going to leave you with a very witty rhyme that was written in the 1600s by somebody here. He that goes to bed, and goes to bed sober, falls as the leaves do, and dies in October. But he that goes to bed, and goes to bed mellow, lives as he ought to do, and dies an honest fellow.
Sheila, thank you so much for such an informative talk, and you have researched this area so well, and it shows in that talk and lecture. So another round of applause there for Sheila. Thank you. And thanks to all our speakers today, to Joe McCarthy, George Lehan, Michael Goulding, Mary O'Sullivan, Deirdre Fitton, who am I forgetting? Sheila Burke. Two Sheilas, and if I've forgotten anyone, my apologies. Thank you for coming. We were delighted with the turnout, and the man behind me here, Colin Nichols, is going to say a few words before we have a hymn from the Moviddy Union choir. So thank you all very much for coming again.
We've been living in the parish of Moviddy for the past 17 years and never really quite understood where the name Moviddy came from, realising that the Church of Ireland has 3 churches, none of which is actually called Moviddy. So this has been a wonderfully enlightening session to be here and hear all this information. I'm sure we all admire these historians who can churn out all these dates and all these facts and get it all right. It's absolutely fantastic. As regards to Moviddy Union Choir, David Bowles, oh dear, what's his surname? David Bowles, who was our rector here during the COVID years, unfortunately, but one of his brainchilds was to form a Moviddy Union Choir. And we performed here, well, we performed a few times, but we performed in a little presentation we gave in Kilmurry Church, which was also to do with the history of the area. And Michael here said we should come along and sing today, but unfortunately most of them didn't, because they weren't really invited by me, so my fault, mea culpa. But anyway, we've gained some new recruits, so we'll sing a hymn, thinking of this place and the graveyard in particular. You know, the number of funerals that must have taken place here, and as good Protestants they would always sing a hymn, and they'd probably sing 20 verses of it as well. But we thought we'd just get everybody to join in. We just had a metrical version read by Sheila of Psalm 23. The version we all know is the Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want to the tune Trimond. So we'll sing that, and please join in. And just the choir's information, verses 1, 2 and 5 will be enough, I think.
Thank you, Colin, and thanks to everybody, and particularly to Mary now, who is the chair of the HAA. Thank you all for coming.
My soul.
Are we live? We are. I get a reputation for forgetting things. Next Saturday, the 24th of August, the Moviddy Union are having a coffee morning from 10:30 until 12:30 in Directory in Aherla. So you're all very welcome. I can vouch for it, unfortunately. Stuff is very good. So if you're next Saturday, put it in the diary. And again, sorry for forgetting it again. Again, have a safe home. And thanks for your attendance. Bye now.